I'm actually not even on a side today.
Yeah.
And I'll get to that. Why are you on Texas?
I gave them a chance. Maybe not me as the overwhelming authority in college football, but entering that game on this set to you guys, I said there was one elite defense entering the matchup in Austin back to end out October. It's not the Bulldogs like it used to be. It is Texas.
College football today, only on SportsGrid.
Those guys, those rookies, the Pacom Daddiers, the Jacob Toppins, right? The Tyler Koleks, those young kids. He wants to get them that check. It means a lot to Brunson. And honestly, folks, it's going to mean a lot to this New York Knicks franchise that's never been back to the Eastern Conference Finals or the NBA Finals since 1999.
Betting above the rim, only on SportsGrid. The Bostonian versus the Book.
I remember one time, I don't know if Kenny will remember this, I said put 100 on, I think I left it on a text, put 100 on this horse that won, and then Kenny called me back later and goes, hey, I never got the text. And I'm like,
no.
Oh yeah. Remember that, Kenny?
I would never stiff anybody. He texted me as they're loading into the gate, maybe, like it's too late.
The Bostonian versus the Book.
The NFL and college, they don't operate on the same timelines, right? UNLV's head coach just got, the Purdue job this morning, where I imagine, right, UNC probably needs to know from Bill.
And let's say it's late December, and we see 7, 8 teams open, and none of them want Bill. Then Bill's got to make a decision. Does he want to be a college head coach?
Pro Football Today, only on SportsGrid.
Good morning. Welcome to NewsWire here on SportsGrid. It's another Football Friday. We've got the Army-Navy game coming up. Lots of action, of course, in Major League Baseball. Also, Bill Bender will join us, courtesy of Sporting News. We'll break down the very latest going on in college football. Bowl games and the season are upon us, including a couple of games tomorrow as well. But last night, it was supposed to be the marquee matchup of the week in the National Football League. Very high total. We're going to get a lot of points. And instead, we got a dud last night. Bad weather. I think that's probably one of the reasons why you see this final score of 12-6 yesterday, effectively putting the 49ers season to bed, and the Rams season marches on. San Francisco just had all kinds of problems offensively in the rain in their own building, especially in the first half. And the Rams did just enough in the second half to win the game, including some catches from Puka Nacua and some running from Kyron Williams. And Sean McVay, the head coach of the Rams, is pretty much aware his team has been doing it and winning in a lot of different ways. Last week it was on offense. This week it was on defense.
What a job by our group tonight. So much respect for the 49ers. And I think what's really cool is this team has found a bunch of different ways to be able to win football games. You come off a 44-42 game the other day, and then you win 12-6. And, our group did what they needed to do to be able to get it done. And the defense just felt like they were coming up with, stop after stop. What a pick by Darius Williams. What a great job by Kobe Turner getting a couple sacks. Really proud of Josh Carty to be able to go 4 for 4. We needed every single one of those. And then thought as the game went on, we really struggled offensively. The weather was definitely a factor early on in terms of some of the things that limited what we could do. It was a lot more of an issue than I think probably what would have been recognized on the TV or even if you're just in the stadium. But there were times when it did slow down. And I thought Matthew made the plays that he needed to make. I thought Kyron ran really tough. We were able to sustain some drives. It felt like we stayed a little bit more connected in the run game in the second half to be able to at least sustain possession and move the football, get some first downs, run some clock off. And like we know we'd love to be able to finish those with touchdowns in the red area. But the Niners, they did a great job defensively. There's going to be some great things we can learn from, but we'll take the win. And like I said, I'm really proud of this football team.
Yeah, really good run for the Rams now as they try and catch the Seattle Seahawks for the division. As far as San Francisco is concerned, a very dismayed Brock Purdy after the game seems to be defeated and coming under the realization that the 49ers probably not headed to the playoffs this year.
Yeah, I mean, it's everything, man. Like our season and our guys, trying to fight to get in this thing and fighting for each other, playing for each other, man. So, that's what comes with playing quarterback and being in this position. You're trusted with the ball in your hands and to make the right decisions in the right moment. And that's something, man, that I'm going to have to learn from for sure moving forward.
Sunday, everyone said you had to win out and that every game was a playoff game. What are you feeling right now?
I mean, obviously this one hurts. And I'm just trying to comprehend it really still. So don't really know what the whole picture looks like, but we have a lot of guys in the locker room, man, that are going to continue to fight, including myself, for this organization and for our fan base and for each other more than anything to finish out the season in the right way and focus on one game at a time and see where we're at the end of it. So,
at least for the time being, there's one player on the 49ers doesn't appear to be all in on the team. Devondre Campbell, defensive player for the 49ers, refused to enter the game in the third quarter for San Francisco. A very good player who they could have used in this one, for whatever reason, declined to enter. Second player we've heard about this. Deontay Johnson was the first one a couple of weeks ago. Campbell, after the game, not getting an endorsement from his head coach Kyle Shanahan and George Kittle, their starting tight end.
Happened with Devondre Campbell. He didn't play and he went into the locker room at some point.
Yeah, he said he didn't want to play today.
Play today?
Yep.
The coaching staff?
He did when I asked him why he didn't want to go in. So
during the game or before?
No, that was in the third quarter.
Does that create dissension or disbelief or just disconnection on the sideline?
Not disbelief or disconnection like as a team. That is one person who just decided not to, play for his teammates. And I don't think that doesn't make our offense look at each other and be like, wow, man, we're falling apart. It's more of or like the defense, hey, we're falling apart. It's more of a one person making like Mooney said, a selfish decision. And I'm with Mooney on that. And I've never been around anybody that's ever done that. And I hope I'm never around anybody that does that again.
Really tough scene for the 49ers overall. Meanwhile, let's get to the National Basketball Association. The complaining from Steve Kerr got a look into a final play in the game against the Houston Rockets, but it looks like at least the NBA is saying that Kerr was incorrect. In the last 2-minute report confirmed, officials made the correct call when Jonathan Kuminga was assessed a personal foul on Jalen Green on a loose ball scramble. Houston wins 91-90 Wednesday night against Golden State. Steve Kerr can't like this one. The Celtics are now 20-5. They beat the Pistons 123-99. Tyler Hero had 23 points for the Heat last night against the Raptors. They win 114-104. Sacramento beats New Orleans 111-109. Domantas Sabonis had 32 points in their win yesterday. In tonight's NBA, no LeBron James once again. They're playing the Minnesota Timberwolves. LeBron is away from the team for personal reasons. Minnesota's 9-point favorites. The Cavs, 21-4 on the season. They're 17-point home favorites tonight against the Washington Wizards. Why? The Wizards are 3-19. The Pacers, 6-point underdogs on the road in Philadelphia. And MVP favorite Nikola Jokic and the Nuggets, 6.5-point road favorites against the Clippers. This weekend, the New Orleans Saints are making a quarterback change again. This time, Jake Haener is their starting quarterback this week, with Derek Carr being out of the game against the Washington Commanders. Garrett Bowles, left tackle for the Denver Broncos, has signed a 4-year, $82 million contract extension to stay in Denver. Odell Beckham Jr. is looking for a new team again. He and the Dolphins decided to part ways. And by the way, the Lions fan who taunted the head coach of the Green Bay Packers basically had his season tickets removed and can no longer attend games in Denver. This was about Matt LaFleur, and went after him during a game. Not a really good scene. Regardless, it's not what you want to do on the field. All right, the Heisman Trophy Awards coming up this weekend. Travis Hunter is expected to be the winner, and he was the big winner on College Football Awards last night. Hunter is the Associated Press College Football Player of the Year. He got 26 of the 43 votes from a panel of top 25 voters. He won the Walter Camp Award, the Chuck Bednarik Award. He's going to win the Heisman Trophy Award as well. Virginia Tech has fired their defensive coordinator, Chris Marve. They were 58th in total defense in the country. Arizona is going to hire a new offensive coordinator, Marshall's Seth Dodge. And Maryland's quarterback, Billy Edwards, says he is entering the transfer portal every single day. A new player seems to be headed to that transfer portal as well. Big rivalry game in college basketball last night. Iowa State taking on Iowa as the Cyclones were 6.5-point favorites. They win and cover the spread. They had a 52-point second half, a huge game for Curtis Jones. He had 23 points in the game. Texas beats New Mexico by a final of 91-67. And in the Big Ten battle between Nebraska and Indiana tonight, we'll see what ends up happening. Nebraska is 4.5-point favorites. Army's on the road against George Washington. The total is 49.5. Let's get to some headlines here from Tennessee. They're reporting some record-breaking sports betting numbers in 2024. Their gross handle increased to $594 million. That's 8.5% over previous months. $547 million handle in October also set a record-setting figure. Louisiana lawmakers are considering how to tax unregulated iGaming operators. iGaming is becoming supremely popular, and a lot of people are betting on it as well. Bet365's year in sports betting shows a major growth in women's sports, very specifically the arrival of Caitlin Clark and betting on the WNBA. Coming up next here on the show, Bill Bender will join us, and another Bill is making headlines. Of course, it's Bill Belichick. He takes the job at North Carolina. Bill will weigh in on that. For those of you who want to download the SportsGrid app, take out your phone, and it's available right now on iOS and Android. Just scan that QR code. You'll be all set with news, notes, and information, picks against the spread, and our schedule here at SportsGrid, and our TV and radio schedule at SportsGrid Radio and SportsGrid.com. We'll be back with Bill Bender from Sporting News in just a minute, previewing the Army-Navy game and giving you his feelings on Chapel Bill to North Carolina. Don't go away.
Uncle Stevie can just walk up the aisle like he's at the supermarket. I'll get a starting pitcher here, I'll get a closer here, I'll get a first baseman here, and he'll just keep throwing things in the cart because there is no limit.
Now he's gone, so they got to go get arms to make that team better. Because the bottom line was they were just outclassed by the Dodgers. Let's face it, they got their ass beat.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
I want the mid-major teams. I want the A-10 to get 3 bids. I want, the Missouri Valley Conference to get an extra bid. I want these teams to go ahead that are 1-bid leagues and give some of these other teams opportunities to make the NCAA tournament. Simply put, folks, when we get to the tournament, we don't care about all these teams that are big-time teams.
Betting above the rim, only on SportsGrid.
How do you find some of this great talent that you've brought in, who are still early in their career, might not have a ton of tape on them yet?
I've been around this business, man, for almost 20 years. So a lot of these guys will tell you that I popped into a lot of gyms, sparred, or just worked on the side, or, kind of worked out, just watching. I've always loved this sport, man. I think it's the greatest. And we want to continue to put on the next up-and-coming superstars. We know we got them.
Only on SportsGrid.
The NFL and college, they don't operate on the same timelines, right? UNLV's head coach just got, the Purdue job this morning, where I imagine, right, UNC probably needs to know from Bill.
And let's say it's late December, and we see 7, 8 teams open, and none of them want Bill, then Bill's got to make a decision. Does he want to be a college head coach?
Pro Football Today, only on SportsGrid.
Bill Bender joins us here on the show. Bowl games coming up. Big Army-Navy game tomorrow. We'll preview that. But first, we'll get into the big story in college football, maybe the biggest story of the year, which is Bill Belichick taking the job with the Tar Heels. It's bringing Bill. And, Bill, I was here on the show a couple of weeks ago. I thought this was like a silly report. I thought there was like no chance of this happening. A lot of great reporting on this, detailing sort of why he ended up taking the job. It does seem to me, Bill, that two things happen here. And you'll tell me if you think I'm right here. It feels like Bill Belichick was not going to get a head coaching gig in the NFL this coming season. At least from what I read, it felt that way. And it also feels like he really genuinely also wanted to take a shot at doing something new. So I think it kind of worked out both ways. But I guess the question I would have for you, Bill, is that do you think he did this on his own accord because he was forced to, because he knew he wasn't going to get a job? Or do you think he genuinely wanted to take the North Carolina gig? I feel like it's a 50-50 here. I just don't know which way the pendulum swings.
Right. I spoke with Julian Edelman earlier in the year, and he made it sound like the whole studio gig was to gather intel for another NFL run. You know, common sense says he was chasing Don Shula. I believe he needed 26 wins to catch the all-time record. Now, Bill Belichick will never publicly say, yeah, I want to catch Don Shula, but it's another notch to have. But I also think there's some substance to the other part. You know, I listened to Bill Belichick speak at an Ohio State clinic back in 2018 and talking to high school coaches. So for anybody that thinks that he can't relate to high school players or can't relate to high school coaches, all I saw was those coaches buried in their phones, scribbling in their notebooks, looking for anything that Bill Belichick said. Now, granted, that was 6 years ago. This is 7 years ago. Some people might say that was a long time ago. I still think if you have a chance to play for a guy that won 6 Super Bowls, you're going to do it.
He was 31-13 in the playoffs, won 6 Super Bowls, and was 3-time Coach of the Year. So, yeah, I mean, that all adds up. But, Bill, the part that I'm not sure that it will add up is that the NILs and the way that you recruit now, does this fit more into what Belichick is going to do or less? It feels like, because if we're just looking at Deion Sanders as an example, and I know this is polar opposites, you know, Deion Sanders doesn't recruit. He just goes to the portal and gets his guys. Is that the future of college football? Because it still seems to me that while 20, 30, 40% of it may be picking off players from that, what about all these kids in high school, getting them to come play for your school?
Well, it speaks to what you were talking about with the challenge. You know, work the portal, try to recruit, be the X's and O's guy that he is. I made the comparison earlier this week. It does remind me, it's a dated reference, but when Bill Walsh went to Stanford after winning 3 Super Bowls with the 49ers, it created a splash. He is, in my mind, the best offensive coach of all time. You go back and look at that Stanford first season, they finished 10-3. They beat 5 ranked teams, which was incredible. They won the Blockbuster Bowl against Penn State, and then it faded pretty quickly. So to me, it's a question of how interested and how into the job Bill Belichick is, because if he pours himself into it and goes all out, yeah, they'll probably win 7, 8, 9 games. You look at their schedule, I've already got the TCU game circled because I'm excited to see it. Now, and I would draw a comparison to Bill O'Brien at Boston College, a coach who coached for Bill Belichick in New England, has bounced between the NFL and college football. He had a 7-5 year at Boston College this year, and it was overall pretty solid. And that was with having his quarterback go into the portal.
Blockbuster Bowl. What's Blockbuster? Bill? I don't think a lot of people know what that is. It's funny.
I still have a card somewhere, Craig.
People have to Google that one. Okay, so Army-Navy tomorrow. Army the better team, but rivalry game, huge. By the way, Bill, highest total I've seen in a while in an Army-Navy game at 39.5. Usually this thing is like 34, 35, 36, but both teams had good seasons. Who do you think comes out of this one? Do you think that it is Army just continuing the storybook season they're having, or is it Navy, who used to dominate Army just as much as any rivalry possible?
Yeah, the last 3 games, 6 points or less. Last 3 games, the over hasn't hit 37, more than 37. I'm tempted by it, though, because of this Army offense. You know, you have Bryson Daly at quarterback. He's had a fantastic season, 100 or more yards in each of the last 11 games. I think there might be a little bit more offense in this one. Love the pageantry of it. Love that it's in Landover, Maryland, in the D.C. area. Yeah. We get to see Army and Navy play in that game. I do think there's going to be a little bit more points. I got it at around 27-17, which would put it at the over, correct? And I like Army to cover. I think this Army team's been really good. I think they win by a touchdown.
All right, fair enough. So Bill doesn't like any of these alt numbers. There's no reason to even do these. If he likes the over at 36.5, 34.5, 32.5, 30.5, Bill likes over on all of them, although I'd never recommend a 30.5 total. I got to be honest with you looking at that. All right, so let's go to the first bowl game of the season. This is as fast as any bowl season I'll ever remember, Bill. Has there ever been a bowl, an Army-Navy game? I don't ever remember one. Maybe there has. I can't recall. And I know it's one of the smaller ones of the bowl season, the Veterans Bowl. South Alabama taking on Western Michigan. Total 57.5. The line pretty much opened up here at 7.5, and is stuck. Tell us who you think is victorious in this one. What are some of the things to watch?
Yeah, South Alabama is pretty good in bowl games. Major Applewhite, there's a name you know. The former Texas quarterback is the coach, got them to 6-6. They've got a running back named Fluff Bothwell. Outstanding name for a running back with 13 touchdowns, and I think they take advantage of a Western Michigan team that has a really good offensive line, but defensively 109th in the country. So another bowl game, maybe you take the over. South Alabama really crushed Eastern Michigan in their bowl game last year, and I think they win this one, get the bowl season started off with a victory for the Sun Belt. And yeah, like you said, these bowl games can be unpredictable because of who is there and who isn't there.
Yep, would agree. Bill, enjoy the Army-Navy game. We'll catch up again next week ahead of some of the bigger bowl games as well. Thanks again for coming on.
Hey, no problem. Thanks for having me.
All right, Bill Bender, Sporting News. College football today, by the way, back on the air tomorrow for those of you interested. Saturday morning, catch the guys previewing Army-Navy and some of the other games tomorrow. We have the sound off coming up next. We'll hear from Bill Belichick, head coach, North Carolina Tar Heels.
Uncle Stevie can just walk up the aisle like he's at the supermarket. I'll get a starting pitcher here, I'll get a closer here, I'll get a first baseman here, and he'll just keep throwing things in the cart because there is no limit.
Now he's gone, so they got to go get arms to make that team better. Because the bottom line was they were just outclassed by the Dodgers. Let's face it, they got their ass beat.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
I want the mid-major teams. I want the A-10 to get 3 bids. I want, the Missouri Valley Conference to get an extra bid. I want these teams to go ahead that are 1-bid leagues and give some of these other teams opportunities to make the NCAA tournament. Simply put, folks, when we get to the tournament, we don't care about all these teams that are big-time teams.
Betting above the rim, only on SportsGrid.
How do you find some of this great talent that you've brought in, who are still early in their career, might not have a ton of tape on them yet?
I've been around this business, man, for almost 20 years. So a lot of these guys will tell you that I popped into a lot of gyms, sparred, or just worked on the side, or kind of worked out, just watching. I've always loved this sport, man. I think it's the greatest. And we want to continue to put on the next up-and-coming superstars. We know we got them.
Only on SportsGrid.
The NFL and college, they don't operate on the same timelines, right? UNLV's head coach just got, the Purdue job this morning, where I imagine, right, UNC probably needs to know from Bill.
And let's say it's late December, and we see 7, 8 teams open, and none of them want Bill, then Bill's got to make a decision. Does he want to be a college head coach?
Pro Football Today, only on SportsGrid.
Welcome back to NewsWire here on SportsGrid. Big press conferences yesterday across the country. Let's be honest. We got some great sound coming for you here. We got Juan Soto talking about joining the Mets. We got Willy Adames. He's now with the San Francisco Giants. We also have the new head coach of the North Carolina Tar Heels and Bill Belichick. Let's get to it all. Time now for the Sports Grid Sound Off. Bill Belichick seems like he's in a really good mood, right? Does that seem fair? I mean, Belichick never really good on press conferences with New England, but my gosh, if his opening press conference with the Tar Heels is any indication, we're going to get a very happy head coach. Is it possible? In Chapel Hill, let's hear from the new man that is in charge of the Tar Heels, Bill Belichick.
Well, Chancellor Bubba, thank you. I can't express my gratitude to both of you, the Board of Trustees, for this amazing opportunity. I've always wanted to coach in football, coach in college football, and it just never really worked out. Had some good years in the NFL, so that was okay. But this is really kind of a dream come true. I grew up in college football with my dad. As a coach at Navy for 50 years, so as a kid, all I knew was college football, and so it's great to come back home to Carolina, and back in an environment that I really grew up in. When you're little, you don't remember everything. Obviously, I was too young to remember a lot of things from Carolina, but as I grew up, you hear the same story over and over and over and over again, and so. One story I always heard was Billy's first words were, "Beat Duke."
We'll see if that rivalry continues now and goes the other way with the University of North Carolina. Meanwhile, rivalry between the Mets and Yankees, fair to say there's going to be a heated one moving forward as Juan Soto essentially picked the Mets over the Yankees. He talked about the reasoning why he chose to play in Queens for the next 15 years.
I mean, the Mets is a great organization, and what they have done in the past couple of years, showing all the ability to keep winning, to keep growing a team, to try to grow a dynasty, is one of the most important things. Definitely what you were seeing from the other side was unbelievable. And the buzz and everything in the field and the future that this team has has a lot to do with my decision. What they showed me and how the organization runs things and how they're going to manage things and how they look at their future, I think it was one of the things that opened my eyes a little bit more. What they've been constructing and building to take all the way up to 15 years, 20 years, you never know. But definitely that was one of the things that opened my eyes more, how hungry they are to win a championship and to want to make a dynasty in the New York Mets.
A lot of stories coming out about why Soto picked the Mets over the Yankees. Really don't know exactly unless you hear more from Soto or maybe even Scott Boras. But needless to say, part of it, without question, is Soto being the man in Queens. All right, you know who else is the man in San Francisco? It's Willy Adames. He got a record-breaking contract with the Giants, more than the guy sitting next to him in Buster Posey.
Willie, obviously, prior to you, the largest contract in franchise history belonged to the guy sitting to your right. Did that come up in conversation, or when did you come to the realization that you were eclipsing his record?
I didn't know until it was done. I was like, wow. That was kind of crazy to me because, obviously, Buster is a Hall of Famer, and I don't even know what to tell you, man. I don't even want to say the wrong words over here, and then I get fired the next day. I just signed the contract.
And you played in 161 last year. How important is it to play 162? Is that something that you kind of have on your radar?
Yeah, of course. I mean, obviously, I want to be out there every day. I want to play every day. That's something that I'm really hard-headed for because, nowadays everybody is like, oh, you got to get a day off. And I'm like, I'm not here to take days off. So I had a hard time last year with Murphy because, I was like, I'm not getting off the field. So I want to let Bob know that I'm going to be playing every day.
All right, let's take a quick timeout. We'll be joined by Sam McQuillan of Legal Sports Report next.
Uncle Stevie can just walk up the aisle like he's at the supermarket. I'll get a starting pitcher here, I'll get a closer here, I'll get a first baseman here, and he'll just keep throwing things in the cart because there is no limit.
Now he's gone, so they got to go get arms to make that team better. Because the bottom line was they were just outclassed by the Dodgers. Let's face it, they got their ass beat.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
I want the mid-major teams. I want the A-10 to get 3 bids. I want, the Missouri Valley Conference to get an extra bid. I want these teams to go ahead that are 1-bid leagues and give some of these other teams opportunities to make the NCAA tournament. Simply put, folks, when we get to the tournament, we don't care about all these teams that are big-time teams.
Betting above the rim, only on SportsGrid.
How do you find some of this great talent that you've brought in, who are still early in their career, might not have a ton of tape on them yet?
I've been around this business, man, for almost 20 years. So a lot of these guys will tell you that I popped into a lot of gyms, sparred or just worked on the side or, kind of worked out, just watching. I've always loved this sport, man. I think it's the greatest. And we want to continue to put on the next up-and-coming superstars. We know we got them.
Only on SportsGrid.
The NFL and college, they don't operate on the same timelines, right? UNLV's head coach just got, the Purdue job this morning, where I imagine, right, UNC probably needs to know from Bill.
And let's say it's late December, and we see 7, 8 teams open, and none of them want Bill, then Bill's got to make a decision. Does he want to be a college head coach?
Pro Football Today, only on SportsGrid.
Welcome back to NewsWire here on SportsGrid. Sam McQuillan is with us from Legal Sports Report. We'll dive into the latest news on sports betting, by the way, over at LSR. That is legalsportsreport.com. You could read about all of these articles that we're going to talk about. Sam, great to have you here on this Friday, ahead of a big weekend, of course, in pro football. One big game in college football, but we're just a couple of weeks away from the biggest college football playoff that we have ever seen. 12 teams are going to go at this thing. Used to be 4. Used to be 2. Expanded playoffs means more money. And Sam, I'm guessing it means more wagering as well.
You're spot on, Craig. I wonder in a couple of years, will we be talking about a 24-team playoff, a 48-team playoff? Because it seems like you say, the more teams they add, the more money is involved. And of course, where there's more money involved, there's always more betting money. We've seen, sports books be a huge boom for the industry. So it's no surprise that they're expecting more money to be bet on college football this time of year than ever before. You have these marquee matchups now instead of these meaningless bowl games in the past that a lot of players would sit out or, opt out of in favor of the NFL draft or enter the transfer portal. Next week, you have SMU at Penn State, go Lions, Tennessee and Ohio State, Clemson and Texas. These are big matchups between big fan bases, which draw a lot of betting interest. And at the sports books, DraftKings is telling me that we're expecting more handle than ever because people are actually going to care about these games, and these teams really have a reason to play for. You have more games just overall going from 3 playoff games to 11. That just increases the sheer number of games that you're betting on there. Then the format itself, you're going to have the 5 conference champions getting automatic bids as well. So those betting on those games was up as well versus just in the past. You've seen some teams even sit out of conference championship games or rest their players to stay healthy for the playoffs. At ESPN Bet, they told me that one of those games, Texas, Georgia, and then another one of those games, Penn State and Oregon, actually saw as much money or even in some cases more money than is bet on an average NFL game. So we've seen this betting interest spike up. It's only going to continue into the playoffs. And you have more teams with a chance to win it all, which means more people are betting on the futures for different teams as opposed to just, 1, 2, or 3 teams. And even into Selection Sunday, there was a ton of interest because we didn't really know who would be playing who. We didn't know who would be making it, which obviously has a huge part in what ultimately happens at the end of the day. So sportsbooks are really happy with the expanded playoff. It seems like everybody else is so far. I'd imagine we're going to get more and more numbers continue to roll in as we approach the new year.
Yeah, and a lot of people like to predict futures and predict who's going to be where. It's a lot more difficult this year doing that, not knowing who's in the second round of a lot of these matchups. We just know the teams that got the first round bye, very similar to the NFL playoffs. All right, Pat and I talked about this story earlier in the week, Sam, and I know that we're going to expand on it as well. The notion that there's some antitrust lawsuit against DraftKings and FanDuel, or one potentially coming, really doesn't add up to me, Sam. I understand that they are the leaders in the industry, but naturally that doesn't mean that other companies can't get their footprint in. What's going on here with this potential hearing?
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing to talk about right now. As you rightly point out, it didn't really add up at first, but now we're kind of hearing, at least I'm hearing, the climate around this in the industry, what people are thinking of it, is really changing a lot just over the past week. Originally it came out that the senators, who really have had no involvement in sports betting, were calling on a lame duck FTC and a lame duck DOJ to investigate these supposed antitrust claims from this one source document that this random Temple Law professor had sent out. And like you point to, Craig, other people have options to bet on different apps. There was really no evidence we've seen of this happening. But now a lot has changed. First of all, I'm told that there will be a couple of key witnesses at this hearing, one being NCAA President Charlie Baker, who, while he did sign the bill to legalize sports betting when he was governor in Massachusetts, he's been relatively critical, or at least outspoken, about its impact on student athletes, even calling on a lot of states to ban player prop betting on college athletes. You're going to have a Rutgers professor who's been critical of the industry testifying at this hearing, and someone from a company called Epic Global Solutions, which specializes in dealing with problem gambling. They employ a lot of people who are gambling addicts, recovering gambling addicts themselves, who have now worked really admirable to tell their story and use their story to work with leagues and sports books on solutions here. But I'm told from industry sources that nobody representing the industry itself has yet so far been invited to speak at this thing. So that kind of points us in the direction of maybe this is going to be a very critical hearing. You don't know what will come out of that. More has come out in terms of the picture at what the FTC will look like next year. Trump just appointed his new nominee. That nominee is a former staffer of one of the senators who called for this investigation. He also works for a law firm that does heavy work with one of DraftKings and FanDuel's chief competitors, which does not do sports betting. So that kind of leads us to maybe some breadcrumbs as to where this is exactly coming from. At the end of the day, we don't really know if it will amount to anything. It could, it might not, but it definitely seems to be more than we thought it was at this time last week. And I'm sure more is going to come out. Really excited to see, what flies during this hearing next week.
All right. Well, we'll update you on that next week here on NewsWire. Now let's get the latest update on the upcoming Super Bowl. Sam, naturally, because more states become legalized, more people bet on the Super Bowl than ever before. That was the case last year. That was the case the year before. Is there any other reason to think that will change this year? Maybe some wrinkle or new way to bet on the Super Bowl that I'm unaware of? I feel like I've been doing long enough to know, even back when they used to print out those sheets at the Superbook, page 1, page 2, page 20, just so many different options to bet. But really, in the end, it's more states being legalized and more ways to bet. That's why the numbers go up. Am I wrong?
No, you're 100% right, Craig. I think what's actually notable this year is that we will only have one more state added to the list this year. So in the past, you saw 4 states, 10 states, a bunch of different states had launched since the past year, boosting numbers up. It's only North Carolina added to the mix this year, which it's a big state, but it's not enough to really, boom handle in and of itself. I think what you're going to see this year is, more ways to bet, more people betting, the rate at which people are betting going up as well. At Legal Sports Report, we've kind of used the historical data of what's happened in the past couple Super Bowls to indicate the growth. Last year, you had 1.38 billion bet, which was obviously a record. And this year, maybe it could reach about 2 billion. You have a lot of companies have talked about how they have gotten more out of their customers, especially in older markets as sports betting has progressed. We've certainly seen companies like FanDuel use it as a big marketing ploy. They have their Kick of Destiny. It's a huge opportunity for people to sign up because they give a lot of promotions and bonuses tied to the specific event, as opposed to a lot of, the run-of-the-mill $5 get 200 bonus credit promos that they have done previously. I think what's really interesting too is last year, the public won on the money line, on the spread, on the total. It was all in the public's favor, but it was actually one of the best Super Bowls ever for sports books because of the proliferation of player prop bets, same game parlays. So I'm really interested to see how that wrinkle fits in this year, where, the actual game outcome really does not have a significant impact. Last year's kind of the first year we saw that. So should be another interesting matchup this year, despite whoever's playing in it.
Yeah, and a lot of different props, and we have great coverage of it here, of course, at SportsGrid, fantasy shows, regular shows, and I'm sure you guys will be covering it over at LegalSportsReport.com. Sam, have a great weekend. Thanks again for coming on NewsWire. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. You too, Craig.
All right, Sam McQuillan with us. And speaking of which, coming up a little bit later in the show, I'm going to tell you why a lot of folks were really upset with Thursday night football. It has a lot to do with fantasy, less to do with reality for a lot of people like me playing in the fantasy football championship, but more quarterfinals. Coming up next, though, we're going to hit on the NBA. I believe this is the biggest point spread of the season in any game. And so we're going to find out whether or not Cleveland can cover this big number against Washington next. Our guy Brad Thomas is going to weigh in on that game and a whole lot more. Don't go away.
Uncle Stevie can just walk up the aisle like he's at the supermarket. I'll get a starting pitcher here, I'll get a closer here, I'll get a first baseman here, and he'll just keep throwing things in the cart because there is no limit.
Now he's gone, so they got to go get arms to make that team better. Because the bottom line was they were just outclassed by the Dodgers. Let's face it, they got their ass beat.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
I want the mid-major teams. I want the A-10 to get 3 bids. I want, the Missouri Valley Conference to get an extra bid. I want these teams to go ahead that are 1-bid leagues and give some of these other teams opportunities to make the NCAA tournament. Simply put, folks, when we get to the tournament, we don't care about all these teams that are big-time teams.
Betting above the rim, only on SportsGrid.
How do you find some of this great talent that you've brought in, who are still early in their career, might not have a ton of tape on them yet?
I've been around this business, man, for almost 20 years. So a lot of these guys will tell you that I popped into a lot of gyms, sparred or just worked on the side or, kind of worked out, just watching. I've always loved this sport, man. I think it's the greatest. And we want to continue to put on the next up-and-coming superstars. We know we got them.
Only on SportsGrid.
The NFL and college, they don't operate on the same timelines, right? UNLV's head coach just got, the Purdue job this morning, where I imagine, right, UNC probably needs to know from Bill.
And let's say it's late December, and we see 7, 8 teams open, and none of them want Bill. Then Bill's got to make a decision. Does he want to be a college head coach?
Pro Football Today, only on SportsGrid.
Time to get some insights on the NBA tonight. Let's bring in Brad Thomas. He knows all about it. We'll break down a few games, some huge spreads, by the way, in the NBA tonight. And so it's always dangerous, at least from my perspective. Let's see what Brad thinks. Brad, Cleveland's been, if not the best team in the NBA, close to it, pretty much the best. That's fair. They're 17-point favorites tonight against Washington, chasing history here. I don't know if Washington's going to get to 5 wins, man. Like, they stink, sorry to say. Total 232. and a half. What do you have a strategy on these when you see big spreads like this? I mean, I know we're going to do a little alt lines here. Maybe that is the way to go. How do you usually approach these lines?
Well, normally when I see like these massive point spreads, I just try to wait and kind of be as patient as possible and go and look at the role players, see if any of their player props stand out, and then I take their alt lines. But I felt like this line or this point spread that was set by the books was just basically they just went off of their model. Their model probably has it as a 17, maybe an 18 point win by the Cleveland Cavaliers, but I felt that was kind of lazy. I felt that was just like they didn't know what to do with this game. We're going to stick it basically on our model, nail on, right? I thought this was a little bit higher, especially given the circumstances. The Washington Wizards have committed to this youth influx, but they also have a ton of injuries, right? Sadiq Bey, Brogdon, Kispert, Kuzma. Basically, everyone I named is all of that older leadership outside of Valanciunas that's on this team. They're playing against a Cavaliers team who could be getting Mobley back. But what I really like about this Cavaliers team, they're efficient. They rebound the ball a ton. And what's really important about that is the Wizards don't really rebound really well. They give up a ton of offensive rebounds, and they shoot poorly. They're one of the worst defensive and offensive rated teams in the NBA. But what's more criminal about how bad they've been, it's been from the three-point arc, and their best three-point shooters won't be in this game. I think they're 32nd, right? Like in three-point shooting this season. The last two times these teams played, they won by 29, the Cavaliers, and I believe it was 31. So I'm taking the alt line of minus 24.5. I figure 25-point victory is probably closer to what I would make it, a 24.5 point spread. But a sports book would never, ever do that because it's so difficult to win by that number. So getting plus 195 was really nice for me.
Yeah, I mean, I can't get behind picking a team to win by 30, but I understand the notion of it. 24.5 and plus 190. All right. Pacers, 76ers, some hope here a little bit for Philly moving forward, I think. They're 6.5 point favorites tonight, total of 225.5. Generally speaking, these are two teams that can score at will when things are going in the right direction for them. What do you like tonight in particular in this matchup?
Yeah, in this game, I went back and forth. I initially liked the Sixers to win and the total. I thought I could get a nice plus money price, but I also ultimately landed on the 76ers team total over 115.5 points. Pacers play really, really fast. They don't turn the ball over a ton, but their pace should give extra possessions to the 76ers. We know the 76ers aren't really high in pace, but they've already hit this number once without Embiid in the game. Granted, it did take overtime at the beginning of the season for them to cash against the Pacers, but now they get Embiid back. Why I like that is because not only do you get Embiid, you get a healthy Embiid, and you get 4 days rest. The increase of volume from the other guys is what's going to be seen. In that first game they played, Tyrese Maxey took about 35 shots in that game. Won't happen. But they will get an increase from the free throw line. Embiid takes a record number of throws per game. I think they'll be able to dominate in the paint and get to the free throw line, which helps this team total go over. The good news about taking the over 115.5 team total for the 76ers is they don't even have to win the game. The Pacers play so fast. Their games are so high scoring. It doesn't matter who wins. At least one team's going to get 116 points. Both might get there.
All right, like that. Let's go now to Memphis and Brooklyn, where the Grizz 11-point favorites over Brooklyn, which, doesn't really tell the story. The story here is Memphis is really good, and I think that's kind of why the line is what it is here. I mean, the Nets have been win, loss. It seems like back and forth all season long. A total of 230.5. That's another spot where Brooklyn has struggled, is on the defensive side. Any opinion on this one?
I've been waiting patiently to get the official Zach Edey news, but it's been reported that, he still needs to practice with more contact before he's going to be in the lineup. So it's looking closer to the weekend before he plays. That's massive for Nick Claxton. I'm taking his over 8.5 rebounds. This is one of those lines where I can't say this has a massive hit rate of 80%, that kind of information that everyone loves to deliver, because he's only averaging 7.5 boards per game. But the Grizzlies are a top 10 team in boards allowed to centers. Now Edey being out, it gives the size advantage back over to Nick Claxton. He'll be able to grab some boards. He pulled down 8 boards in 25 minutes the last time these two teams played. Zach Edey was in the game, which I thought was really nice. I think he'll be able to get on the offensive glass, which he couldn't do in the last matchup between the two teams.
All right, and then finally, we got the Nuggets taking on the Clippers. Nuggets 6.5-point favorites. Only blip on the Nuggets season has been, I think they were one of the teams that Washington has beaten, shockingly, this season somehow. Total of 228.5.
Yeah, that's the Nuggets being the Nuggets. They dominate everyone and then lose to teams like the Wizards. This is probably my favorite bet of the day, which is always scary, right? Because all of the stats and everything funnels you straight to Norman Powell over 20.5 points, right? Kawhi injured, Paul George gone. This is the highest usage, 27.1, that Powell has had in his career. He's averaging 23.6 points per game, and he's up to his highest minutes per game at 32.5. What's really nice about Powell is how well his field goal percentage is. Not just three-point shooting, but he's also shooting 49% from the field, 49 as well from three, taking at least 8 threes per game. They're allowing the 8th most points to shooting guards, 9 most threes. I think he goes off in this game.
Brad, some awesome stuff as always. We'll hang on to some of those player prop bets, see how they work out. We'll catch up again soon. Thanks for coming on NewsWire.
Thanks for having me. Have a great weekend.
All right, coming up next, it's time for some last licks. We dive into another ball up for auction. I just cannot believe that somebody would pay $40,000 for what I feel is a meaningless ball. But I'm going to get to that here in a second. Also, as I mentioned, fantasy football playoffs underway for a lot of you, for me as well. One player in particular had me really upset last night. I'm going to tell you who that is. And we're going to end the show and end the week with some good news. We'll have it next for you. Don't go away.
Uncle Stevie can just walk up the aisle like he's at the supermarket. I'll get a starting pitcher here, I'll get a closer here, I'll get a first baseman here, and he'll just keep throwing things in the cart because there is no limit.
Now he's gone, so they got to go get arms to make that team better. Because the bottom line was they were just outclassed by the Dodgers. Let's face it, they got their ass beat.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
I want the mid-major teams. I want the A-10 to get 3 bids. I want, the Missouri Valley Conference to get an extra bid. I want these teams to go ahead that are one-bid leagues and give some of these other teams opportunities to make the NCAA tournament. Simply put, folks, when we get to the tournament, we don't care about all these teams that are big-time teams.
Betting above the rim, only on SportsGrid.
How do you find some of this great talent that you've brought in, who are still early in their career, might not have a ton of tape on them yet?
I've been around this business, man, for almost 20 years. So a lot of these guys will tell you that I popped into a lot of gyms, sparred, or just worked on the side, or, kind of worked out, just watching. I've always loved this sport, man. I think it's the greatest. And we want to continue to put on the next up-and-coming superstars. We know we got them.
Only on SportsGrid.
The NFL and college, they don't operate on the same timelines, right? UNLV's head coach just got, the Purdue job this morning, where I imagine, right, UNC probably needs to know from Bill.
And let's say it's late December, and we see 7, 8 teams open, and none of them want Bill, then Bill's got to make a decision. Does he want to be a college head coach?
Pro Football Today, only on SportsGrid.
Welcome back to NewsWire here on SportsGrid. So many different historical baseballs being auctioned off. Another one went up. We're going to tell you how much it went for. Talk a little fantasy football. I know a lot of you who are in the playoffs talk about that. And as I mentioned, some good news for a legendary broadcaster. Time now for some last licks. A lot of people would have probably forgotten this moment. Maybe not for our producer Frank and a lot of Yankees fans, but in Game 5 of the World Series, there was a ball hit to Aaron Judge in center field. He dropped the ball. And, I don't really think it was that big of an iconic moment in the history of sports, but it just goes to show you what collectors will pay for different things of this nature. They have auctioned off that ball, the ball that Judge made an error on, and somebody was willing to pay over $40,000 for this baseball. I assume that this is somebody in Los Angeles of some kind. I mean, was this the determiner as to whether or not the Dodgers won the World Series or not? I don't know. To me, that's a little bit of a stretch, but I get it when you just have endless amounts of money and you're a fan of a team. It can't be the Yankees. Maybe the Dodgers. Maybe it's somebody that's a Yankees fan that just wants to blow up the ball. Remember that? A long time ago when Mark McGuire broke the record, somebody bought the ball. They wanted to blow it up because of steroids. I don't get it. $40,000, way out of the price range. If you told me this went for 5 or 10, I would have said, all right, that seems reasonable, but I would love to know who ended up buying this ball and what the purpose is behind it. Unfortunately, we probably will never know. Well, here's what we know. If you're in the fantasy football playoffs at this point and you're like me and you started Cooper Kupp last night, like me, you're in really big trouble going into the weekend. Yes, this was upsetting. Cooper Kupp, I believe he had some targets because I was watching the game, but he ended up with no catches and no yards. This is arguably one of the better wide receivers in the NFL. Maybe not a wide receiver one, as they say anymore, but my gosh, you had to start him. You couldn't sit him in fantasy. Now, last night I did sit Deebo Samuel in the same team. Okay, that was a really good move for me, and I didn't play Brock Purdy. I'll play Jane Daniels, as I always have. But there's no getting around playing a quality wide receiver like Kupp. Puka Nacua has clearly taken over that number one role, and there's really nothing I or anybody else can do at this point. You have to root for a miracle if you started Cooper Kupp yesterday. I mean, coming off and getting a 0 on a Thursday night is not a good setup into the weekend. But I digress. Let's get to some good news as we leave the show here. Don't want to be too negative here on a Friday. Dick Vitale, the most legendary college broadcaster in basketball of all time, has been undergoing surgery and has had cancer for several years now. But Dickie V went to social media yesterday and posted that he got some good news from his doctors, and as of right now, he is cancer-free. So that is certainly awesome because he's been doing a lot less games over the last couple of years. We know how popular he is for the sport. People forget he also coached in the NBA with Detroit Pistons for a few years, but certainly one of the most fun and energetic broadcasters that we have ever seen, an iconic broadcaster in the Basketball Hall of Fame as well. Hopefully the best of health for Dickie V here for this holiday season, and the best of health for him and everybody out there watching for you as well. That will do it for our week of shows here on SportsGrid here at NewsWire. Wow, it's been a fun week. We got through it. I want to thank our guest today here on the program, Bill Bender from Sporting News. Also want to thank Brad Thomas. And, of course, thanks to Sam McQuillan from Legal Sports Report. As always, our director, Luke, and our producer, Frank. Here's what's coming up next here on SportsGrid. Lots of fun programming straight ahead your way. So make sure you stay tuned. But coming up at 3 o'clock Eastern, we got Scott Farrell, coast to coast. He's got you covered with all of the college basketball action and getting you ready for all the action tomorrow in college football with that big Army-Navy game. I'll be on the air tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Eastern. For those of you who are still in the fantasy football playoff hunt, me and George Kurtz have you covered Saturday morning, 7 to 9 a.m. Eastern. And then Sunday morning from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Eastern, it is Joe Pisapia and Matt Stryker helping you win your fantasy football matchups. Our show, by the way, Fantasy Sports Today, each and every Saturday and Sunday morning, really throughout the fantasy football season before we shift over and talk some fantasy baseball, which usually comes about January or February. So best of luck at all your matchups this weekend. Best of luck with all of your sports bets. Next time I will see you back here is tomorrow morning at 7. If fantasy football is not your thing and it's just NewsWire for you, then I'll see you Monday morning, 11 a.m. Eastern for our next edition of the show. Have a great weekend, everyone. See you then.